Hey guys, it's Miss Landry, and today we are going to learn about proteins. Now, this is one of my favorite topics besides genetics, especially once we get into enzymes, which are a type of protein. So let's just jump right in. For learning objectives, you've got 5 for this unit. This video is only going to cover 2. So we're going to look at just 2 types of proteins and what are their functions, even though there's, I think, 7 or 8. And then we're also going to look at how proteins are made in terms of their monomer and their polymer. So let's go. First of all, the monomer, if you remember, is the building block. So that's like the one Lego piece. And then the polymer is when you put those Lego pieces all together and make a structure. So the monomer of a protein is called an amino acid. And you do need to know what an amino acid is made up of. You don't need to know specifically the chemicals or the elements. But for example, let me go back here. The first thing you need to know is that there is a central carbon. So if you look at this picture, the central carbon is just what it says. It's right in the middle. That is called the alpha carbon. So everything is kind of built around that. So when you're drawing this, you can just put a C for the central carbon. The next thing it has is something called an amine group. You do need to know the name of it, but you don't need to know that it's NH2. However, the easiest way to draw this, if you notice, the shape is kind of like a triangle. So then you can put a bond and have a triangle. So that's your amine group, okay? And then the other thing it has is over on the other side, we have a box structure. And this is actually called a carboxyl group. The term group means it's a bunch of elements working together. So a carbon, 2 oxygens, and a hydrogen is COOH. So that is your carboxyl group. So you can draw that one as a box on this side. There's a little hydrogen up top. It's okay if you forget to put that. And then finally, the last thing, and probably the most important part of this, is something called an R group. Now, an R group hangs off of this central carbon. And remember, this is a 3-dimensional model, right? So you can put the R group anywhere as long as it is bonded to that central carbon. This R group is basically different chemical groups that have different chemical structures. So depending on what this R group actually is, will determine what amino acid it is. I believe as of now, we have 21 that have been discovered so far, 21 different amino acids. So let's take a look at some of them. Notice the top part on all of these amino acids are exactly the same. So it's this right here. It's like the backbone of an amino acid. It's always the same. You've got your amine, your central carbon, and your carboxyl, exactly the same. But then you have your R group, and these are all different. So we've got like aspartic acid here, we've got tyrosine here, and notice that's got a carbon ring. We have histidine, I think that's what that says. We have arginine and glutamic acid. They all have different chemical groups where that R group is. And that definitely makes the amino acid different. So if I were to ask you what determines which amino acid it is absolutely the R group. So let's take a look at a few of them. This is just to give you an idea of the differences. They do have different chemical properties. So if you look at this group up here, they are charged. So like these 3 right here are all positive. These 2 have a negative charge overall. Here we have some polar but uncharged side chains. And down here we have hydrophobic. If you remember from water, hydrophobic means it doesn't, or I'm sorry, from lipids, hydrophobic means it doesn't want to be around water. So all of those different chemical properties create different chemical interactions within a protein. Okay, so the R groups identify which amino acid it is, and they have different chemical properties. So now let's jump into what actually happens to those monomers. So I'm going to take, if I'm going to make a protein, I will take hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands of amino acids and just link them together in a chain. Okay, and that is what we call the primary structure of a protein. So if you look here at this picture, we have all these different amino acids. Now these are the 3-letter codes for amino acids, but all of these are amino acids. And what determines which ones go in which order is your DNA, your genome. So your DNA actually codes for the order of these amino acids, and different orders create different proteins. It's actually a really beautiful system if you think about it. Now, after you make this primary structure of protein, which is just a link of amino acids, a chain of amino acids, you go into other structures of proteins. Proteins are not just long strings like that. So what will happen is you'll have interactions between, let's say this glutamic acid is a positive and tryptophan is a negative. You're going to have an interaction between those two, a chemical interaction, which causes it to fold into a very specific three-dimensional structure. It looks like a mess. Like if you look at this protein right here, like, oops, sorry, like that's how we draw proteins, is like this, but it's a very specific structure based on the DNA code. So that's what happens in the tertiary structure, or the third level of structure. The R groups that have the different chemical properties start to interact, and that creates that three-dimensional structure. There is one other level, a fourth level, or what we call a quaternary level of proteins, and that's when multiple subunits come together and bind together to create one functional protein. That doesn't happen with all proteins, but this is an example of hemoglobin, which is in your red blood cells. It has 4 subunits, so 2 alphas, 2 betas. They come together and create one functional protein. So again, remember, it's just a chain of amino acids coded for by DNA. Those R groups start to interact and create that three-dimensional structure. And then if it needs to, it can join a bunch of those together to create an even bigger protein. That's the basics of what a protein looks like. So let's do a few practice questions. What are the 3 main pieces or parts? There's actually 4. What are the 4 main parts of an amino acid? In your notes, please go ahead and draw them and maybe label them if you can. What determines amino acid, the amino acid? So like what determines if it's tryptophan versus methionine? And then they also have different chemical properties. Go ahead and answer that question. And then this is a multiple choice question. What is your answer for that one? And then finally, one more multiple choice question. So go ahead and jot down your answers in your notes, and we will go over these in class, next class. Finally, I just want to really quickly talk about 2 types of proteins. There are about 7 or 8, maybe 9 types of proteins, and it's all based on their function. The first one we're going to talk about briefly, we're going to go into this in great detail, but is enzymes. Enzymes are super important to life. Without enzymes, humans and all living organisms would cease to exist, because our reactions, our metabolism is too slow. And so enzymes act as biological catalysts, and they make it possible for the reactions to occur with less energy. And we're going to go over that in more detail. A lot of genetic disorders are actually non-functional or lowly functional enzymes. And so if you have an enzyme that doesn't work, it's going to cause problems. So some examples are amylase. That is an enzyme in your saliva that breaks down amylose, which is a starch. Helicase is an enzyme that actually unwinds your DNA when it needs to copy it. And then DNA polymerase helps to build DNA when you need to copy it. Notice the ending of all those words. And go ahead and answer the question there about what do you notice about the endings? The other one I want to talk about really briefly is structural proteins. So this is what helps maintain cell shape. It helps to maintain muscular shape and skeletal. It helps with skeleton formation and cartilage. It's involved in a lot of your connective tissue. Your connective tissue is basically structural proteins. You've probably heard of keratin. That's what's in your hair, your skin, your nails. It's what gives your skin. Elastin is what gives your skin its flexibility. And as you get older, those kind of start to break down a little bit and you don't have as much. And that's why you see people like me starting to sag a little bit. So that's it for this video. I hope that helps. Make sure to submit your notes and I will see you guys soon. Thanks.